Good day, everyone. Today, we are going to learn about ancient Chinese civilization. Ancient China produced what had become the oldest extant culture in the world. The name China comes from the Sanskrit China, which was derived from the name of Chinese Qin dynasty. The geography of China paved the way of civilization and culture development. It was isolated from much of the world by the dry deserts of Gobi Desert to the north and Taklimakan Desert to the west, the impassable Himalayan mountains to the south, and the Pacific Ocean to the east. Having little contact with others, the Chinese believed their culture was the center of the earth and called themselves as Middle Kingdom. There are two great rivers that run through China proper: the Yangtze River in the south and the Huanghe River in the north, the second largest river in China and the sixth longest river in the world. Huanghe is the birthplace of ancient Chinese civilization and often called cradle of Chinese civilization because it was along its banks where Chinese civilization first formed around 3000 BCE. During certain times of the year, the Huanghe River frequently overflows. The water killed people and damaged housing and crops. Because of this, Huanghe is also nicknamed China's sorrow. Furthermore, it is also called Yellow River, named for the color of the silts called loess that are carried downstream in its flow, which is great for farming. Meanwhile, most of the people were farmers. They worked hard and produced 2 or even 3 crops a year. In the north, people grew crops of wheat or millet, while along Yangtze River in the south, the farmers took advantage of warm climate and rainy weather to grow rice. Meanwhile, they grew rice in flooded fields called paddy fields. Around 5000 BC, people lived in small villages in the Yellow River Valley in small round houses. The great example was Banpo Village. They had small round houses that had floors dug into the ground to make them more safe. Next, there were also caves under the ground to store food. There was a trench around the village to protect them from enemies. It also kept animals from wandering. Furthermore, wealthy ancient Chinese houses had 3 buildings attached to 3 sides and a gate on 4th side. Their houses had tile floors and used tiles on the roof in a carved upward shape. Each home had similar layout with a garden in the center. Meanwhile, poor ancient Chinese built numerous smaller houses around an open garden area with a shared space in the middle. Their houses were small, made out of mud brick, while the roof was usually made of thatched for protection from rain. The small villages and farming communities grew into tribes and ruled by their leaders, and the Chinese dynasties originated from this civilization. There were over 13 dynasties that ruled China. Let us discuss the developments of the first 5 dynasties in the history of ancient China. The first of these government was the Shang dynasty, lasted between 2070 BC to 1600 BC. Our knowledge of people during Shang dynasty comes from ancient stories and the ruins of villages. According to legend, Emperor Yu, also known as Yu the Great, was the founder of Shang dynasty. Furthermore, their region had been plagued by great floods and was not solved for decades. Yu was ordered to step up to tame the floods, and he engineered and developed irrigation systems along the Yellow River, like canals and dams. After that, he organized the people to rebuild their shelters and developed agriculture. After 13 years, the farmers were able to produce bountiful harvests since Yellow River floods no longer destroyed their crops so often. As a ruler, Yu the Great commissioned the construction of roads, established trade routes, and united several tribes. Furthermore, from 1600 until 1050 BC, the area around Yellow River was ruled by a family of kings called Shang. Thus, the area was called Shang dynasty. The king displayed immense power. He was able to cross towards supernatural. The people treated him the link between heaven and living beings. During this period, the Shang built their houses and public buildings out of wood and mud. Meanwhile, the aristocrats lived in large houses in cities with very high protective walls, while merchants and craftsmen that work for a living lived outside the walls in houses made of mud. Furthermore, farmers lived in villages in small houses made of mud or bamboo in the countryside near their fields. Besides, they domesticated animals and used for meat, ritual sacrifices, and divination. Aside from that, farmers used spades, sickles, and stone plows in farming. Meanwhile, they grew millet, wheat, barley, rice, fruits, vegetables, and nuts. Did you know that millet was the primary staple food in Shang dynasty? It was also used to make wine. Furthermore, wine is often used as a spiritual offerings to gods or ancestors in ancient China. Furthermore, the craftsmen during the Shang dynasty learned to make bronze by mixing copper and tin. With the development of bronze technology, more bronze was produced to make drinking cups, vessels, agricultural tools, weapons in warfare, and horse-drawn chariots. Did you know that ceremonial weapons and fittings for bronze weapons were carved from jade? Furthermore, early Chinese writing used pictographs or characters that stand for objects. During the Shang dynasty, people used logographs, characters that stand for words. Meanwhile, logographs are commonly written on oracle bones made of turtle shells or shoulder blades of a cow. In addition, the ancient Chinese used ink and brushes to do their writings. Meanwhile, another important characteristic of civilization was the ancestor worshipping. The people believed their dead ancestors would either help or harm them. Other than that, they also worshipped many gods. They offered prayer, tea, wine, and food to their ancestors and to various nature gods. In addition, the Shang kings practiced divination, which is the ability to see and understand the future using oracle bones. They would write questions for their ancestors or gods on the oracle bones and then place them over fire. The fire would cause cracks in the bones, which were then interpreted by the priest as the gods' responses to their questions. They also practiced animal or human sacrifices for two reasons: to honor ancestors and gods, and to provide companionship for the dead in the afterlife. The aristocrats buried servants with them to continue to serve them in the afterlife. Furthermore, the next dynasty was the Zhou dynasty, which was ruled by a powerful leader named Wen Wang. Zhou was the longest dynasty in ancient history. The early leaders introduced the idea of mandate of heaven. They gained their authority to rule from the gods. Their government was based on the feudal system. Zhou dynasty was the period when many innovations were invented. During this period, iron smelting was developed in China. Also, food supply became more stable. The farmers used iron plows drawn by oxen. In earlier times, farmers had to plant the seeds by hand, resulting in uneven growth and waste. The farmers created an iron seed drill to help make planting of seeds into the soil more efficient at a uniform depth. It was during this time plants were grown in rows for the first time. Their inventions and large-scale irrigation increased crop yield, so they were able to store surplus food. Also, with the development of roads, canals, and other waterways, they were able to transport farm crops to market. Meanwhile, coinage began to be used. In addition, Zhou dynasty was also the emergence of Chinese philosophers that influenced Chinese government and the people. Next, the Qin dynasty preceded the Zhou dynasty in 221 BC to 206 BC. The main achievement of Qin dynasty was the unification of China and created the first dynasty ruled by the first emperor, Qin Shi Huangdi. He proclaimed himself first sovereign emperor. After he unified China, Qin Shi Huangdi started to construct roads in the different places in China in the following year. With Xianjiang as a center, he constructed 3 very long highways. Did you know that he instituted an even more rigid government and standardized Chinese writing systems? Next, Qin set people to work in building Great Wall of China in the north. He believed the country needed better protection. Also, he introduced censorship and burned useless books. Scholars who refused to allow their books to be burned were either burned alive or sent to work on the wall. The Qin dynasty oversaw the construction of China's terracotta army statues. It was built to guard Emperor Shi Huangdi in the afterlife. Now, for the last dynasty to be discussed is the Han Dynasty. It was founded by Liu Bang in 206 BCE. The Han Dynasty would be one of the most important and long-lasting dynasties in all of Chinese history. It ushered in golden age of peace, prosperity, and developments. During this time, the National Civil Service was established to create a strong and organized government. Because of the examinations, paper was invented. The first paper was made from rags, but later, plant materials were used, such as bark, hemp, cotton, and bamboo. During the Han Dynasty, scientific advancements were invented, such as sundial, seismograph, and water clock. During this period, farmers used combined methods of plowing and harrowing. But few years later, the inventors developed moldboard plow. The new plow helped Chinese practice contour plowing. Did you know that the Chinese learned how to make silk from cocoons of silkworms? As a result, the Silk Road was created for trading. They traded silk, paper, horses, furs, ivory, and jade. They were exposed to new skills like using grapes to make wine. They also improved water transportation. They invented iron rudder in China and was able to make huge ships that sailed around the world. No matter how long the dynasties ruled, however, they helped to advance China from a small ancient society to modern powerhouse that it is today. That's all about the first 5 dynasties in ancient China. Thank you for listening.